The Korean billionaire only came to sponsor a children's charity event. He never expected to see the woman who had disappeared from his life 8 years ago. She saw him, grabbed a little girl's hand, and tried to leave before he could reach her. He thought she was running because she still hated him. Then the little girl bent down to help him pick up a stack of papers. She looked up, and for one terrifying second, the billionaire forgot how to breathe. She had his eyes. Not similar, not close. His. When he finally asked his ex-wife one simple question, "How old is she?" she didn't answer. She just took the little girl's hand and disappeared into the crowd. What Min-seo didn't know was that the woman he'd spent 8 years believing had abandoned him, had actually spent those same 8 years protecting both him and their daughter from a secret hidden inside his own company. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from tonight. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. She has my eyes. Min-seo didn't say it out loud. He didn't need to. The little girl kneeling in front of him, gathering his scattered papers with both hands, had his exact eyes. Not similar, not close. His. He hadn't planned on crouching down to help her. He hadn't planned on coming to this event at all. Not until 3 days ago. Not until Yoon Min-seo mentioned it in the elevator, like it was nothing. The children's center, sir. The one on the east side. And something in him had just said yes before he'd thought it through. "Sorry," the girl said, stacking the last few papers crooked. "The wind's really annoying today." "It's fine." His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Thank you." She looked up at him fully then, sunlight catching her face, and Soo-bin's chest went tight in a way he didn't have a name for. He told himself it was nothing. Kids had brown eyes all the time. "Grace," a woman's voice, sharp with worry, cut across the courtyard. "Grace, come here, please." Soo-bin turned. 8 years disappeared in half a second. Diana stood near the entrance in a plain green coat, her hair shorter than he remembered, her face paler, but it was her. It was unmistakably her. She had gone completely still, one hand half raised like she'd meant to reach for her daughter and forgotten how to finish the motion. "Mom!" Grace bounced up, unaware that the ground had just shifted under 2 adults. "This is the man from the sponsor company." He dropped his papers. "I know who he is," Diana said quietly. Soo-bin stood slowly, papers still in hand, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. Around them, children laughed. A ribbon-cutting ceremony was being set up. A photographer adjusted his lens, completely oblivious to the fact that 2 people who used to be married were standing 8 feet apart, staring at each other like the last 8 years hadn't happened. "Diana." Soo-bin. She said his name carefully, like she was testing whether it would hurt. It clearly did. He wanted to ask her 100 things at once. "Where have you been? Why didn't you call? Did you think about me at all?" Instead, what came out was smaller and far more dangerous. "How old is she?" Diana's face didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. "I have to help with the ceremony," she said, and it wasn't an answer. It was an escape route. "Diana." "I have to go, Soo-bin." She took Grace's hand and walked away fast enough that it wasn't quite running, but close. Grace glanced back over her shoulder, confused, offering Soo-bin a small wave that he didn't know how to return. He stood there holding papers he no longer cared about, watching the back of a woman he had spent 8 years trying to convince himself he'd stopped loving. Han Ji-ho appeared at his side a moment later, phone in hand, oblivious. "Chairman Moon wants you at the podium in 5 minutes for the—" He stopped. "Sir, you look like you've seen a ghost." "I might have." "What?" Soo-bin didn't answer. His eyes were still fixed on the space where Diana had disappeared into the crowd, one hand still holding Grace's, neither of them looking back again. The ceremony went the way ceremonies do. Ribbons were cut, photos were taken. Soo-bin said the right words at the podium about investing in children's futures, and every single word felt like it belonged to a different man, someone who hadn't just met a 6 or 7-year-old girl with his own eyes staring back at him. He watched Diana across the courtyard the entire time. She never once looked at him. That, more than anything, told him she was afraid. By the time the event ended, she was gone. No goodbye, no explanation, just an empty patch of grass where she and Grace had been standing an hour earlier. That night, alone in his apartment on the 40th floor, Soo-bin didn't turn on the television or pour himself a drink like he normally did after a long day. He sat at his desk and pulled out an old cardboard box he hadn't opened in years, the kind that smelled like dust and forgotten things. Inside was a photograph of himself at 6 years old, standing stiffly beside his father, wearing a suit that was clearly a size too big. Next to it, he placed a second photograph, one he wasn't proud of taking. He'd snapped it quickly on his phone during the ceremony, zoomed in on Grace's face while she laughed at something a volunteer said. He set the two photos side by side under the desk lamp. The eyes were the same shape, the same slight downward tilt at the corners, the same way they crinkled when something surprised her. He sat back slowly, one hand pressed against his mouth, staring at proof he hadn't asked for and couldn't unsee. 8 years, and she never told him. Or maybe, a smaller voice in him said, something he didn't want to listen to yet, maybe she never got the chance. He didn't sleep. By 5 in the morning, Soo-bin had already made and rejected the same decision 6 times. Call the investigators. Don't call the investigators. Call her. Don't call her. Han Ji-ho found him still at his desk when he arrived at 7. 2 photographs sitting under the lamp like evidence in a trial. Only Soo-bin was attending. You didn't go home, Ji-ho said. It wasn't a question. I am home. You know what I mean. Ji-ho picked up the older photo, the one of Soo-bin as a boy, then set it down slowly next to the picture of Grace. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He didn't need to. I want you to find out where she's been, Soo-bin said. Not to expose her, not for custody. I just want to know. I can have a full report by tonight. Financials, address history, everything. No. Soo-bin's voice was quiet, but firm enough that Ji-ho looked up. I'm not doing this behind her back. I did enough of that 8 years ago, apparently, without even knowing it. Ji-ho's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't ask what that meant. He had learned a long time ago that Soo-bin only explained himself when he was ready, and pushing never made him ready faster. Then what do you want me to do? Find out about the arts center, the address, the hours, nothing about her personally. I'll ask her myself. Ji-ho hesitated. And if she won't answer? Soo-bin looked at the photograph again. Then I'll ask my daughter. The community arts center smelled like paint and old wood, nothing like the marble lobbies Soo-bin was used to walking through every morning. Children's drawings covered one entire wall, taped up in uneven rows, a mess of color that no interior designer would have approved, and every parent clearly loved. Diana was kneeling beside a table of 6-year-olds when he walked in, sleeves pushed up, showing a boy how to mix blue and yellow without making mud. She saw him before he reached the doorway. Her whole body went still, the same way it had at the ceremony, like stillness was the only defense she had left. You can't be here, she said, standing quickly, wiping paint from her fingers with a rag that had clearly been used for the same purpose 100 times before. I'm not here to cause trouble. That's not what I asked. Diana. He kept his voice low, aware of small ears nearby. I need 5 minutes. She glanced back at the children, then toward a side room. 5 minutes. Before they could move, a small voice interrupted them both. You came back. Grace stood in the doorway, holding a paintbrush dripping green onto the floor, grinning like his visit was the best surprise of her week. Diana's face went pale, in a way that had nothing to do with the fluorescent lighting. I wanted to see your paintings, Soo-bin said, crouching to her level before he'd even decided to. I'll show you mine. It's not done yet, but it's going to be really good. Grace grabbed his hand without asking permission, the way children do when they haven't yet learned that adults sometimes need it. Diana didn't stop her. Soo-bin noticed that. He filed it away, like everything else that day, another small piece of a puzzle he didn't yet have the full picture of. Grace's painting was a family standing under a rainbow, 3 figures holding hands. 2 adults, 1 child. That's you, Grace said, pointing at the tallest figure without hesitation. And that's my mom, and that's me. Soo-bin's throat tightened. He hadn't asked. She had simply known. Why haven't you ever come before? Grace asked, tilting her head with the particular bluntness only children manage. Mom said my dad was busy. Are you not busy anymore? The room went quiet. Diana's hand found the edge of the table, like she needed something solid to hold on to. Soo-bin looked at Grace, then at Diana, and for the first time in 8 years, he didn't have a prepared answer for anything. I'm trying not to be, he said finally, which wasn't a lie, even if it wasn't the truth Grace deserved either. Grace seemed satisfied with that. Children often are. She skipped off to grab more green paint, leaving the two adults standing in the wreckage of a question neither of them had been ready for. She's ours, Diana said quietly, before he could ask. Yes, she's yours too. I'm not going to keep denying it. Then tell me why. I can't. Diana. I said I can't. Her voice cracked slightly, the first real break he'd seen in her since the courtyard. Not because I don't want to, because I can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Soo-bin studied her face, searching for the lie, and found none. That frightened him more than if he had. You owe me the truth. I owe you a lot of things, Diana said, eyes wet but steady. The truth is the one thing I can't afford to give you. Grace's small hand slipped back into his a moment later, tugging him toward the drying rack to see someone else's painting, utterly unaware that she had just become the only bridge holding her parents' entire fractured history together. That evening, Han Ji-ho called, his voice tighter than usual. I wasn't looking for this, he said. I was pulling old vendor contracts for an unrelated audit, and I found something. Diana's disappearance. It didn't start the week she left, sir. It started 3 days after a confidential company audit went missing. Same week, same department. Soo-bin sat down slowly, the photograph of Grace still open on his phone screen. Whose department? Ji-ho's silence lasted just long enough to answer the question before he even said the name. Yoon Min-seo's department, Ji-ho said. Soo-bin didn't move for a long moment. The name sat in the room like something heavy that had been dropped and hadn't finished falling. That's not possible, he said, though even as he said it, he heard how weak it sounded. She's been with me since I started the company. She's been in my office longer than you have. I know. Ji-ho's voice was careful, the voice of a man delivering news he wished he could take back. That's what makes it worse. Soo-bin closed his eyes. Yoon Min-seo, who remembered his coffee order without asking, who had covered for him during his father's worst years, who he had trusted with calendars, contracts, and secrets he barely trusted himself with. It didn't fit. Nothing about it fit. Get me everything, he said finally. Quietly, no one touches this file but us. He didn't sleep that night either. By morning, he had made a decision that surprised even him. He went back to the arts center, not to interrogate Diana, but to finally give her what he should have given her 8 years ago. The benefit of the doubt. She was alone this time, cleaning brushes in a back sink, and she turned when she heard the door, already bracing for another fight. I'm not here to argue, Soo-bin said. Then why are you here? Because I think I finally know what to ask you. He set his phone on the table between them, an old audit summary Ji-ho had dug up, glowing on the screen. This went missing 8 years ago, the same week you disappeared. I don't think that's a coincidence anymore. Diana's hands stopped moving. Water dripped steadily from the brush she was holding, the only sound in the room for several seconds. Diana. I found it by accident, she said quietly, not looking at him. I wasn't trying to expose anyone. I was just doing the quarterly reports, the way I always did. And the numbers didn't match. Money going out to accounts that didn't exist. Millions. Moving through shell companies with your family's name attached. Why didn't you come to me? Because 2 days later, someone ran me off the road on my way home. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she finally looked at him, eyes glassy but hard. It wasn't an accident, Soo-bin. I checked. There were no skid marks from the other car. Whoever it was wanted it to look random. Soo-bin felt something cold move through his chest. Why didn't you tell me? I would have protected you. I would have burned the whole company down before I let anyone touch you. That's exactly why I couldn't tell you. Diana set the brush down, her hands trembling slightly. You would have gone after them, publicly, loudly, the way you do everything, and they would have buried you right along with the evidence, and I would have been raising Grace alone anyway, except you'd be dead instead of just gone. The room went silent again. Soo-bin sat down slowly, because his legs didn't feel entirely trustworthy. You disappeared to protect me. I disappeared so you'd get to keep your life, Diana said. I didn't know if that made me brave or a coward. I still don't. Before I tell you what happens next, I'm curious where in the world you're watching this from tonight. Drop your city in the comments, because this story is about to take a turn none of you are ready for. Neither of them saw what was coming. Chairman Moon arrived at the office an hour later, summoned by Ji-ho under the pretense of a routine briefing. He looked older than Soo-bin remembered, or maybe Soo-bin was simply seeing him clearly for the first time. I need to ask you something, Soo-bin said, closing the office door. 8 years ago, did Diana come to you before she disappeared? His father's silence answered the question before his mouth did. She did, Chairman Moon admitted finally, sitting down heavily. She showed me the numbers. She was frightened, Soo-bin, genuinely frightened. And I told her to stay quiet and let me handle it internally, because I was afraid of what a public scandal would do to this family, to your future, to everything I had built for you. And then what? And then nothing happened. Because I didn't handle it. I buried it instead and told myself I was protecting you. His father's voice broke, an ancient river cutting a new channel. I thought protecting the company was protecting you. I was wrong. I have been wrong for 8 years, and I let you believe your wife walked away from you for no reason, when the truth is, I helped push her out the door myself. Soo-bin sat frozen in his chair, watching the two pillars of his life, his father's authority and his own understanding of the past, collapse into rubble at the same moment. Diana had suffered alone, not because she stopped loving him, because she loved him enough to let him believe the worst. He drove back to the arts center that evening without calling ahead. Diana was locking up, keys in hand, when she saw his car pull into the lot. I know now, he said, walking toward her. About the audit. About my father. About all of it. Diana's composure finally broke. Just slightly, just enough. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, worn soft at the edges from being carried too long. I kept this, she said, opening it. Inside sat a ring, untouched, exactly as it had been the day he'd first offered it to her. I told myself I threw it away. I didn't. I couldn't. She placed it in his open palm without another word, her fingers lingering half a second longer than necessary. Soo-bin's phone rang before he could answer her. It was Ji-ho, and his voice held a fear Soo-bin had never heard from him before. Sir, Yoon just accessed the archive server. She knows we're onto her. She's already left the building with a copy of everything. And sir, Ji-ho's voice dropped lower, tighter. She knows where Grace goes to school. Grace's school. Soo-bin was already moving before Ji-ho finished the sentence. Keys in hand, the ring still closed in his fist. Get security there now. I don't care what it costs. I want eyes on that building in the next 10 minutes. Already done, sir. I called the moment I hung up with you. Diana grabbed her coat, her earlier vulnerability replaced by something harder, faster, a mother's instinct that didn't wait for permission. I'm coming with you. Diana, she is my daughter too. I have spent 8 years running, so she'd never have to. I'm not sitting this one out. They arrived to find Grace safe, sitting in the principal's office with a coloring book, completely unaware that her existence had almost triggered a security lockdown. Soo-bin's relief lasted exactly as long as it took Ji-ho to call again. She didn't go for Grace, Ji-ho said. She went for the press. Sir, she's already reached out to 3 outlets. She's claiming Diana fabricated the whole affair to extort the family. She's got documents. Doctored, probably. but real enough to cause damage before we can prove otherwise. Soo-bin closed his eyes. Convene the board, tonight. Sir, if you go public with this before we control the narrative, the stock. I don't care about the stock. Diana, standing near the doorway with Grace's small hand in hers, looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. Not fear, not gratitude, something closer to disbelief, like she was watching a man become someone she hadn't been allowed to know existed. The board meeting the next morning was the kind of room Soo-bin had spent his whole life mastering, and the kind of room he now walked into feeling like a stranger. Chairman Moon sat at the head of the table, older, smaller somehow, but steadier than Soo-bin had seen him in years. There is corruption inside this company, Soo-bin said, without preamble, without the careful phrasing his advisors had begged him to use. It's been buried for 8 years, and it cost me the woman I loved and 7 years with my own daughter. I'm not burying it any further. A murmur moved through the room. Someone mentioned shareholder confidence. Someone else mentioned the quarterly earnings call. Soo-bin let them finish before he spoke again. I understand what this could cost the company. I've decided I'd rather lose the company than lose what's left of my family twice. Chairman Moon rose slowly from his seat. Before this goes further, he said, voice carrying to every corner of the room, you should all know that I was informed of financial irregularities 8 years ago and chose to protect this company's reputation instead of investigating them. That failure sits with me, not my son. If anyone is to be held accountable first, it should be me. The room went silent in a way boardrooms rarely do. If you've ever had to choose between protecting the people you love and protecting everything you built, tell me where you're watching from, because Soo-bin is about to learn that choice comes with a price he didn't expect. The story hit the news within hours, and it hit uglier than anyone had prepared for. Yoon's version reached cameras first, painted with just enough truth to be believable. Diana, portrayed as a woman who vanished with a billionaire's daughter and resurfaced only once there was money to extract. Reporters camped outside the arts center. One shouted a question at Grace on her way inside, loud enough that the little girl flinched and grabbed her mother's leg. That night, in the quiet of Diana's apartment, she sat across from Soo-bin with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. I want to take Grace and go somewhere quiet until this passes, she admitted. It's what I know how to do. It's the only thing that's ever kept her safe. Running isn't safety anymore, Diana. It's just delay. Soo-bin reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, close enough that she could choose to close the distance herself. I need you to stay, not because I'm asking you to trust the company, or the lawyers, or the board. I'm asking you to trust me. Diana looked at him for a long moment. Something in her chest visibly warred with itself. The last time I trusted someone with the truth, I ended up disappearing for 8 years. I know. His voice was quiet, unguarded in a way it rarely was. I'm not asking you to forget that. I'm asking you to let me be different than the world that made you afraid. She didn't answer with words. She reached across the table and let her fingers close around his, and for the first time since the courtyard, neither of them pulled away. The public hearing was held 3 days later. Cameras lined up outside the courthouse steps, like a wall Soo-bin would have to walk through to get his family back. Diana stood beside him at the base of the stairs, pale but upright, Grace's hand in hers. A reporter pushed forward before security could stop her. Grace, is it true your mother kept you from your father on purpose? Grace looked up at the woman, confused more than afraid. My parents always loved each other, she said, simple and clear, the way only a child can say something and make it sound like the only truth that matters. They were just apart. The reporters went quiet for half a second, long enough for Diana's hand to find Soo-bin's, her fingers trembling as they laced through his in front of every camera present. It was the first time in 8 years she had touched him in public, and she did it without flinching. They had almost reached the courthouse doors when Soo-bin's phone buzzed once, then again, insistent. It was Jiho, and his voice carried none of its usual composure. Sir, Yoon released something else. A document, signed 8 years ago. What document? It's Diana's signature, sir. On a legal release, dated the week she disappeared. She waived all rights to you, to the company, to any future claim on your name or your assets, forever. Subin turned to Diana, whose face had gone the color of the marble steps beneath them. I never signed that, she said, but her voice wavered on the last word, uncertain in a way that terrified him more than any accusation Yoon had made so far. I never signed that, Diana said again, steadier now, anger replacing fear. Whatever that document is, it's forged, or it's something I signed under duress and never understood. Subin didn't ask Ji-ho to send it. He didn't ask for a lawyer to verify it first. He held out his hand, and when Ji-ho placed the printed pages into it, he tore them in half without reading a single line. Sir, Ji-ho started. I don't need proof to believe her. Subin's voice carried down the courthouse steps, loud enough for the cameras to catch every word. I spent 8 years doubting a woman who sacrificed everything to keep me alive. I'm done doing that. Diana stared at the torn paper scattering at their feet like something out of a dream she hadn't let herself have. Grace, sensing the moment even if she didn't understand it, wrapped her arms around both their legs at once, holding her parents together the only way a 7-year-old knew how. The weeks that followed were not clean. The investigation into Yoon Min-seo took months to unravel completely. Financial threads leading through 3 countries and more shell companies than even Ji-ho had expected. Yoon was arrested trying to leave the country with a passport that wasn't hers. Chairman Moon testified against his own former assistant without flinching, a small redemption for a much larger failure. He retired shortly after, quietly, without the farewell gala his position usually would have demanded. Instead, he redirected an enormous portion of company funds into children's education programs, starting with the very center where Grace had painted her first family portrait. It's not enough, he told Subin one evening, standing in his nearly empty office. It will never be enough for what I let happen to her. To both of you. No, Subin agreed. But it's a start. Starts matter. Diana didn't move back into Subin's life overnight, and he never asked her to. She expanded her arts foundation instead, using his support without letting it define her, keeping her name on the building she'd built from nothing. They saw each other several times a week, then most days, slowly, the way trust is supposed to grow instead of the way it's supposed to be demanded. There was no rushed proposal, no second ring pulled from a pocket to replace the one she'd kept hidden for 8 years. Some evenings they simply sat together after Grace fell asleep, talking about nothing important, relearning each other one ordinary conversation at a time. I keep waiting to feel guilty, Subin admitted one night, the ring from years ago sitting on the table between them, still unworn, still waiting. For not finding you sooner, for not asking harder questions before you disappeared. You didn't fail me, Diana said. I made a choice to disappear instead of trusting you to survive the truth. That was mine to carry, not yours. Maybe we both carried the wrong things for a long time. Diana reached over and, for the first time since the courtyard 8 years and 1 lifetime ago, let her fingers rest against his without hesitation or fear underneath them. If a story like this one stayed with you tonight, I'd love for you to come back for the next one. Subscribe, and let's keep finding these unforgettable journeys together. Grace's school held its spring art exhibition on a clear afternoon in early May, paper lanterns strung along the courtyard where, 1 year earlier, a little girl had helped a stranger gather scattered papers in the wind. Diana and Subin arrived together, not as a couple performing normalcy for cameras, but simply as 2 parents holding hands because it no longer required an explanation. Grace pulled them both toward a painting hanging near the entrance, hers, unmistakably, done in the same bold colors she'd used the day Subin first walked into her classroom. 2 adults, 1 child, hands linked beneath a sky she'd painted enormous and bright. Underneath, in careful, uneven handwriting, she had written, "She has my eyes, I have their hearts." Subin knelt in front of it, the way he'd knelt in front of her that very first day, and this time there was no photograph to secretly compare, no doubt left to resolve. Just his daughter, grinning up at him, waiting to see if he understood what she'd made. "I understand," he said quietly, and meant it in every way the words could carry. As the three of them stepped out into the courtyard afterward, sunlight falling the same way it had the day this all began, Grace tugged both their hands at once, stopping them beneath the paper lanterns. "Can we finally take our first family photo?" she asked, smiling like the answer had never really been in question. Subin looked at Diana. Diana looked at their daughter, then at him, and nodded once. They didn't pose. They didn't wait for the perfect light. Subin simply lifted his phone, pulled his family close, and let the moment happen exactly as it was, unplanned, unpolished, and entirely theirs. Some love stories end with everything restored to what it once was. This one ended somewhere better, with a family who had lost 8 years, and chosen, finally, to stop counting what was gone and start counting everything they still had left to build.